So we're all sort of. Well, I guess I'll kick off. Thanks everyone for joining us for the Australia and New Zealand PowerShell user group meeting for August 2019. I've got all of our links on the slide here. The main one is probably that top github.io one, because from there you can link off to everywhere, Twitter and Meetup, and you can find our contact details and upcoming schedule and all of that. And when I say us, I'm referring to myself, Josh King, here in New Zealand, and Adam and Shah over in Australia. All of our Twitter handles are there, so feel free to reach out to us at any time if you've got requests for content or you want to speak or anything like that, or just have general feedback or want to get in touch. So tonight we have Brett Miller, who's not up at an ungodly hour like we'd normally have. And he's going to be covering PowerShell and Microsoft Teams. And his Twitter's there, so I'm sure he wouldn't say no to reaching out either. So if you're ready, Brett, go ahead. I'll stop sharing and mute myself.
I'm still on mute. Can you see the slide deck here?
Yes.
Yes. Right. Okay. Cool. Okay. So PowerShell and Microsoft Teams, Slack, who just to invoke a bit of controversy because everybody loves Slack. I started using Teams when it first went GA. Is it 2 years now? Was it 2 years in April? I lose track. I think it was 2016-ish when it went out. And so the first thing I did was try and figure out how I could use PowerShell with it. So I'll go over some of what I discovered as part of that in the presentation. Obviously, the first thing you do with any technology now is see if you can do things with PowerShell rather than actually using GUIs. So about me, I'm a live services engineer at Sage. I think it's a live services specialist technically, but I've been doing for PowerShell for 4 years-ish. There's my Twitter, GitHub, and my blog. So brief agenda, Microsoft Teams, what is it? I presume since we're all in Teams that we're all using it, even if it's just for this meetup. I'm going to quickly go over the PowerShell administration module, which is the Microsoft module for managing Teams as an administrator. Webhooks, which was my first foray into PowerShell with Microsoft Teams. And then I'll go into bots, specifically PoshBot, which was written by Brandon Olin, and it's held in quite high regard for its functionality. And Teams, I think backend was one of the highest requested features forward. And then we're going to do like a Q&A at the end if anyone's got any questions. So what is Microsoft Teams? It's a chat-based workspace in Office 365 that integrates all the people, content, and tools your team needs to be more engaged and effective. It's basically Microsoft's version of Slack. I'm using it more and more. Our organization is pushing it more and more. We do have a sort of split where half of our development teams use Slack and half of our development teams use Microsoft Teams, which becomes troublesome and tiresome trying to maintain persistent chat across both platforms. But I think as Teams is becoming more feature rich, and the fact that they've now announced a date for Skype for Business becoming end of life, It's only going to become more prominent. So I don't know if anyone else is like this, but there's a lot of onus and a lot of attention now on distractions, working without distractions, and so many avenues of being attacked by notifications. You've got Teams, Slack, notifications on your phone, Windows notifications, them toast notifications. I'm not sure who would really want them. But it's just all day, every day from any angle. You've got IRC for those who are older than 40, emails, tickets from ServiceNow or whatever ticketing system you may use, actual desk phones if people are still using those, and it takes its toll. And like I say, there's a minimalist approach being taken to actually getting work done now, where people have concentration techniques, and it's just too much for most people. So what I try and do is minimize the different ways that I can be notified. So using Teams as a sort of single pane of glass, rather than having lots of emails for notifications, setting up notifications to go to Teams, and having chats and groups and projects all built out of Teams so that you only have one place to check. I find it a lot easier to deal with than having lots of notifications from lots of different places. So the Microsoft Teams module, this is the official Microsoft Teams module from to manage Teams from an admin perspective. First iteration was terrible in that you couldn't manage a team you weren't a member of, which from an administrator perspective was terrible. I think you also had to be licensed for Microsoft Teams as an admin account to be able to manage it. So the experience wasn't great. There's still a lot of limitations and functionality issues with the current iteration, but they have been making improvements. Because of the way that it ties into SharePoint and Office 365 groups, there's a lot of object IDs and GUIDs for identifying teams, which I don't know about you, but I don't very often type GUIDs out. So working with those at the console or in automation just becomes tiresome. A lot of the limitations that were there, I don't manage teams as much now. We're more of a commercial IT team where I am now, so we're just more consumers of it. But at the time, I ended up writing my own scripts and modules to wrap the existing commands to make it do what I wanted. So what version am I in here? I need to be in Windows PowerShell. I'm currently running PowerShell 7 in most places, but the Microsoft Teams module doesn't let you use the MFA login with PowerShell 7. I just get lots of authentication errors. So you can find the module in the PowerShell gallery, as you would expect, unless you're one of the Microsoft teams that doesn't do that. But it's been published to the PowerShell gallery, and I think it just went GA a few months back as a version 1, so it was in beta release for quite a while. Import the module, and then you can see which commands are available in there. So we're version 1.03 now, apparently. There used to be more commands in there, but they've consolidated a lot of the additional options that you had for Teams. So the settings had their own commandlets, whereas in the version 1 they condensed those into set team, which made it a lot more usable and functional. Connect Microsoft Teams. Is this where it pops up in the background? Yes, it is. And if you're not using passwordless, you should be. It's the way forward.
Hey, Brett.
Yeah.
Can you make that text a point or two
All right.
higher?
Sorry,
Yeah, awesome.
That better?
Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
Yeah. So I've just connected to my personal tenancy for messing around with. It's actually a tenancy I set up for my wife's business, and then I just bolted a license on for me so that I got to play with all the PowerShell goodness. So I just connected, used MFA, and then you can do things like get team, which lists you all of the teams that are available within there. If I go into Teams, you can see in there I've got different teams set up. It's a probably familiar interface for most people now. At least most people are familiar with it. When I first gave this talk, everyone was like, oh, "No, I'm not using that. It's rubbish." And then this was my main issue with it. There's no filter, and like I said, you have to use group IDs to identify all of the teams. So you end up having to do crazy things like looking up for the group ID to be able to get the user from the teams. So you can do, and it's very slow. They have made some improvements over the previous versions, but it's still, there's no filtering on these, so you have to return all the teams or all the users. And I think at previous places where you've got like hundreds and hundreds of teams, it takes a long time to return those. And when I was setting up for this, I totally forgot that I'd created over 100 teams as a test for something. So I had to tidy that up, and it took quite a while to do that. And everything is filtered with where object, so you have to return everything and then filter it, which makes doing anything on bulk really slow. So get team channel. It should only have one channel in there as well. ID, description, display name, general. So that's the team name in there, which matches up with ANZPSUG as the team, and then general as the channel. So because of this, this having to do this to get the group ID, because get team user and get team channel syntax get team channel only support the group ID. So you can't do get team channel like ANZ to return it. You have to literally get the group ID. So you have to do 2 calls to the API to get the group ID of the team to then get the users within that team. So it's a little bit cumbersome and not ideal if you're trying to do things on bulk as an administrator. So what I ended up doing as part of that is writing wrapper functions, which exposed a lot of that functionality for you. Pipeline support and wildcard search for team names, and then just a little wrapper function to get the group ID for a team. So I'll run those. Function. And then this was then give you the ability, so things like creating new channels didn't support pipeline. So you had to then do for each loops all the time. And then you've got me not updating my demos properly, and PS. So this should create me 3 new test channels in there. And if you go into Teams, there's now test channel 1, 2, and 3. Whereas before you would have had to create an array of team names and then do a for each loop and loop through and pass the information to new Teams channel. And then the fun settings was the other one, which has been deprecated now, so I can't run these. But these were the other things MS Teams Group ID was the main one that I wanted to use, so that you didn't have to keep finding the ID. It used it, or it looked it up at runtime for you, so you didn't have to do all those brackets to find the team group ID. And it just enabled better pipeline support. They have actually fixed the issue with pipeline support in the newer versions. I think previously, because everything relied on group ID, none of the output from previous commands for the get commands output the group ID, which could be bounded to any parameters when you were piping it to all the set commands. So it was lots of crazy fun. They have fixed the pipeline support, but there's still no server-side filtering or being able to use wildcard searches based on name rather than group ID, which it's still not very usable, but it's making progress. I think they're using user voice for feedback on that. So if you're using the Teams module as an administrator, I'd highly recommend going on there and trying to get them to improve it. I just wish all the Microsoft Teams would open source all of this stuff now. It would be a lot easier. And one of the things with set team fund settings in terms of usability was it had 3 switches in there, but they weren't actually switches. So you had to rather than just passing 3 switches, you actually had to set Boolean values, which just is the worst experience. But you've got all the fun settings are like Giphy content rating, allow custom memes, but they're all in the set team syntax. I can never type the word syntax. Set. There. So all of these are now, if you see that these are switches for allow, they should be switches, but they're actual Boolean values. So to allow Giphy to set it to true, you actually have to pass true to it when it should either be off or on as a switch. So yeah, that needs some work, but I think that's partly to do with the way that the Graph API works. But all of these were previously separate within the fun settings, so custom memes and things like that. But it's all within set team now, so you can. It's a lot better. And set team does have pipeline support now, which is a lot better than me having to write my own wrapper functions for it. Close that. That's the pretty much low-level, high-level overview of the Teams module. Like I say, it's only really gone GA recently, so it needs a bit of work, and user voice is the place to give feedback on that. Did I create another one? Yeah, test channel 3. That's fine. So no, don't want to start from the beginning. I want to start from where I am. I always get those mixed up. The next thing I was going to cover was incoming webhooks. There's a good chance if you've worked with any cloud technology, you've seen webhooks. They're built into Slack, they're built into Teams, they're built into Azure, AWS. Everything can be triggered with webhooks, and a lot of the stuff that goes into Teams and Slack are triggered via webhooks. So notifications, alerts, updates from the systems, they all use webhooks, and they're useful within Teams for sending static cards to a channel. Output of automation, scripts, notifications. SolarWinds a new relic, not where I am now, but we previously used SolarWinds to output stuff into Teams. So rather than getting emails, which most people set up rules and alerts for and just filtered them off into a folder they never checked, you actually could see the alerts during the day in the middle of conversations, so that they were actionable and people were aware of them rather than waiting for users to ring up. And generally, when you're sending stuff to webhooks, it's just JSON using invoke REST method with HTTP post commands. So they're really easy to get to grips with. At the time, the documentation on Teams when I was first looking at it was very confused, and it was mixed up with a lot of the bot documentation. So a lot of it was trial and error to try and get it to work. You can have multiple webhooks for different purposes, so you can have 7, 8 different webhooks coming from different places, or you can just use the one. It's entirely up to you, and they're really customizable. So I'll just give you a quick demo of those. Yes, I'm in the right channel. So I actually wrote a module called MS Teams, which I'm yet to publish to the PowerShell gallery, but it's just a PowerShell module which allows you to send webhook messages to Teams. If you import the module, it helps. Support. You can see there that that's just pasted a plain message of this is a message. And then you've got first, second, third, fourth messages. And what it does do, because you're interacting with the APIs, you can get it to, there's some customization you can add to the messages you send. So you can get them to display colors to highlight them. So if you're sending notifications through from SolarWinds or from a monitoring system, you can have red is bad, green is good, orange is we should probably look at this, but it's not a massive concern. The other thing that took me a while to get used to because of the documentation was sending detailed information from different systems, or as part of automation. If you were doing lots of checks against various machines or servers, you can actually pass it a hash table and get concise information. So in here, I've just got some demo information in there, but I had previous checks, so I would have an Active Directory automation script which kicked off in the morning before we got to work, and it would give you the status of every DC to make sure that replication was working and there were no errors and all the fun stuff that you needed in there. And purple obviously has no meaning. And then you've got extra title, activity subtitle, and text, so you can kind of split it out as much as you need. You can see you've got a little bit more customization in there, so you can have a bit more information on the cards that you're sending. It's quite flexible, and you can send plain messages, or you don't have to include all 3 of these, or you can include any of the 3. The other thing I looked at, which I thought was quite cool, was being able to send interactive buttons. So I don't know if any of you have used SolarWinds or anything like that, or a lot of the stuff you get through to Slack, where you can respond to messages. So this service on this web server has died. You could effectively write a payload. This is just a URL opener, but on this one you can have post responses. So you could set up a webhook which sends to this, and then you can respond saying restart service, and it'll send that notification off to whichever automation system you decide, and then it'll go and restart the service for you, and then you can get back to bed. You also have feature-rich stuff, sort of leave a comment, so you can leave a comment and click OK, and then it'll send that comment to wherever you wish. Or you can have a date picker, which allows you to send something in here to say, can you confirm a date that you would like this to happen? And then when you click OK, it sends the date back. Or just plain old, here's an alert, here's the link to that alert. You can open it and find out more information. So there's lots of customization you can do with them. I mean, it's limited in terms of, because it's a webhook, you don't have as much as you do with sort of interactive cards that you get in Outlook, where you can get real-time responses and update the card in real time. But for what they are, in that it's just a basic JSON payload, there's lots of customization you can do in there. And even things like embedding images. They have to be hosted images, so yeah, you can embed images in there as well. And you should actually be able to do is that going to do images and buttons? Yeah, so you can do images and buttons, and so that's the extent of what if the module I wrote supports. I haven't looked at it in a while. Like I say, I did it quite early on when Teams went GA. It needs some updates and some fixes put in there, but for the functionality that it offers, it's really easy to use. As you can see, it's just some basic PowerShell commands, and it literally uses one command, new Teams message, and then you've got a button parameter as well. Sorry, a button command, which you just use as a script block. So it's pretty customizable, and if you're using Azure automation or anything like that, you can import it into Azure automation and then customize what you're sending to and from Teams. So it's pretty good. It's pretty extensible, and we use it quite a bit for notification messages for script output. Let's go back to my demo and start from where I was. Okay, so Pushbot is getting a lot more attention than when Brandon first released it. It was initially only had Slack backend, but he's ported Teams backend to that, which is slightly more complex than Slack, but which I'll quickly go over as well in a bit. But yeah, it's basically a PowerShell module. You can install it from the gallery. It's class based, so it's using PowerShell classes rather than just normal commands. So you need to be on PowerShell 5+. The commands Pushbot utilizes are also just PowerShell modules. So it's a module that utilizes other modules. And those modules can be from the PowerShell gallery, or you can write your own internal modules. It has built-in role-based access control. So within Pushbot, you can define users, groups, and roles for people who are allowed to use specific commands, and that's really extensible. It has now Slack, Teams, and I believe there was a Google chat backend, and somebody started a Discord backend as well. I don't think that is in a release state yet. I know Brandon was working on that himself the other week. And it works on Windows PowerShell and PowerShell Core as well. So I had some issues setting up the bot last night, so I'm just going to have to use the previous bot that I had set up. But it's not called ANZPSUG, that's why it's called AnyBytes, because that's not going to work unless I start Pushbot either. No. Start Pushbot. There you go. So this is this built-in command you get with Pushbot. So the way it works with Slack, with Teams, sorry, is slightly different to Slack. Slack has WebSockets, so the bot within Slack can read all the messages that come through and just find the messages that it needs to act upon. With Teams, it's slightly more troublesome to set up in terms of the functionality that you get from Teams is you have to mention a bot. So the way Microsoft are pushing you is to use the bot framework when you're designing anything for Teams. So you build a bot, a standard HTTP webhook bot within bot framework. You link it to Teams. That then triggers an Azure function. The Azure function is literally just accepts the message you send it from Teams and then puts it onto a message queue. Then Pushbot config that you're running here reads off that message queue and actions and sends a reply back. So it sounds more complex than it is, but it's really a pretty simple setup. Can you all see Teams okay on the screen? Is that big enough? Is that better?
Yeah.
That seems good.
Cool. So these are the built-in commands you get with Pushbot. So this is just a bot that where I've previously done this presentation. You hit it, it sends it off to the function, drops it in the message queue, and then Pushbot, which I'm just running locally here, picks up off the message queue, acts upon it, and then sends a message back. And these are the things you get. And like I said, you can install plugins. Plugins are effectively PowerShell modules. You can do all that from within Teams. You don't have to go and install them. You can do things like any bytes, find plugin Pushbot X. And then what that does is by default, it uses the PowerShell gallery. It goes and finds any commands which are prefixed with Pushbot, any modules which are prefixed with Pushbot, and then says, this is the plugin you have available to you. Or you can just do, mention the bot, any bytes, find plugin, and I think it should just return all of them by default. So ChatOps is becoming more prominent as we have tools like Slack and Teams, and this is a medium of interacting with automation, so that you can hand things out to your first line, second line staff to say, there's nothing publicly available, but there's I've seen people who've written Active Directory modules so that you can disable and enable users within Teams. And then if you set it up right within the groups and the modules and the roles within Pushbot, you can say only these people who are in this group can run this command. So you can basically give your first line help desk. You don't need to give them direct access to Active Directory. You can say there's a bot in Teams. You could even have people go in there with just get permissions to find information. But you can basically get your first line help desk to do stuff from here, where there's a transcript of what was run, and you can see what's going on. So these are all the Pushbot plugins that are available on the PowerShell gallery at the moment. There's a lot of Docker ones. Chris Gardner has just released an Azure DevOps one, which uses Donovan Brown's VS Team module. And he's just released that as a sort of a beta at the moment, but it means you can, if you install that, you can find out what builds and releases are succeeding and failing and run reports on that. There's a GChat backend, which I mentioned. There's networking one, which you can do simple ping and dig commands, VMware, VM, and I believe the VMware one you can do like VM snapshots and connect to your VMware servers and things like that. And because effectively this is just running PowerShell in the back end, it's just a medium for you to interact with a remote session, so you can, anything you can do with PowerShell you can do with Pushbot. You just might have to write your own module for it. And the way that the modules are written is they have some extra metadata which you add the permissions to. So when you're writing a module, you just give it a few extra bits of metadata in the module manifest to say this is the permissions it requires for get and set. So you have to set those as part of the Pushbot command. So let's just see if we can install one that doesn't need any permissions. Install plugin XKCD. Pushbot.xkcd. see that's doing that in the background in my PowerShell session that I've got running there. I'm actually running this session in PowerShell 7 as well. So is it finished? Yes, no? Have I broken my bot? Is it taking too long? Well, it didn't seem to like that, did it? Aha, get plugin. It hasn't installed it for some reason. It must have died halfway through. Yeah, so when you, each of these commands, if you do PowerShell gallery, let's turn dog reader off. Poshbot xkcd. Boom that up as well. File list, project site. So I've actually started, or I've thought about writing an Active Directory public module for Poshbot. I think there's a few people who've written similar, but it's obviously all internal. So within xkcd, you should have your module manifest. And what you have down here is release notes. Where are the extra bits and pieces? Functions to export, required modules, Poshbot. Oh no, it doesn't have any permissions on there. So within the commands, psm1, get xkcd, there's this extra metadata that you add to your commands here, which command name xkcd. There's no permissions on this module because it's just a basic one which gets an xkcd comic for you. Should we try installing it again? bytes install plugin xkcd. It doesn't seem to like it. Any bytes. What was the other ones? Poshbot.8ball. I may have broken my session that's running the bot. Any bytes. This may be. It doesn't seem to like installing either on my Wi-Fi or currently within that session for some reason. I've killed my bot. Yeah, so, but I mean, you get the idea of what's available within there. And these are, like I say, they're just PowerShell modules, which you can write yourself. So you can write internal ones for Active Directory. Stuart Moore, who is a SQL Server guy, he went through a demo at PowerShell Day in the UK last year, and he was saying that he restored a non-production database from the tram on the way home from his phone by sending a poshbot command when somebody contacted him about an outage. So you just went into Slack and just said poshbot restore database, give it the database name, and then poshbot went and did it. And then he went about reading his book. So it gives you a really good level of control, a really good level of auditability. And then obviously you've got the built-in RBAC as well. So it's as extensible as you need it to be. You can install your plugins. A lot of people are now running poshbot within a Docker container because all it literally needs is a minimal Linux image with PowerShell, which is capable of running this. And I'm busy playing with Event Hub and Event Sourcing to see if I can get it so that it only has to spin up the container when it's needed, so that our development teams can use Teams to trigger reports about databases and things that they don't have access to in production. So it's really good. It's really extensible. There's some good sessions. Brandon's given some good sessions at Summit on that, so I would highly recommend going and digging those out on YouTube as well. His demos seem to work with poshbot. So any questions on what I've covered around the Teams module, webhooks, the module I've written, or poshbot?
There are a couple of questions in the chat, actually, Brett, if you don't mind having it.
Oh, right. Okay, yeah. I forgot we had a chat functionality. Can you make text bigger? Already done that. I typically pull the list at the beginning of the script or session, then reference the teams from the list, then refresh the list hash table as needed. Yeah, I suppose it depends entirely on your environment. Within my test environment, I think I had 100 teams, and it still took a considerable amount of time to list all of those teams. But yeah, that's definitely an option as well. And yeah, so Josh, your comment about how impressive it is the new channels show up in the UI. When I deleted those 100 teams last night, I actually had to close Teams and reopen it, and then wait about 10 minutes before it decided that it was going to remove those teams. So it might be fast one way, but it's not as fast the other way, as I found out yesterday. Instant status out yet? I'm not sure what that refers to, Sanil. What is syntax? That looks cool. So syntax, slightly off topic. Shift that, maximize. Syntax is a function I've written which syntax get syntax. Or I can do cat function get syntax. It's a function I've written. Does control and plus that doesn't work in there. Which basically runs get command, but then uses regex, which you can see here, to parse what you would normally do: get command, get child item syntax, which prints it across the screen like that. So I've written a regex, which I actually stole partially from Matthias Jessen, so that it just does get syntax, get child item, and it prints it down the screen, which is how they're formatted on the docs. And what it also does is, if you notice, I don't know if anyone, or if you're all familiar with the syntax within the syntax of get command, because the literal path doesn't have any square brackets around it, that's a mandatory parameter. So it makes it really easy. If you look for literal path in here, there's so many brackets in line that it's really difficult to find it. So it's a function I've written which makes it easier to find the syntax of commands, and it's really handy for things like the Azure commands, which have like 7 or 8 different parameter sets, so you can quickly identify what you need to use for that. That
Do you have
is
that
up.
published anywhere?
I think it's it's on GitHub, or if not, it's in a blog post I wrote about Visual Studio Code productivity, which seemed to get quite a bit of traction. But if you can't find it, just give me a shout and I can ping it over. It's definitely on my blog or in a gist or somewhere. But it's mentioned on my blog in the VS Code productivity post. So just dig that post out and have a look. That module makes things a lot easier when I was manually building out those webhook payloads. Yeah, Josh, that's what I started doing as well. I was just using invoke REST method and building the JSON manually when I first went about it. But like I say, when it went GA, the docs were terrible in that they were really confused with the bot framework docs. So finding anything that that made sense at the time was very trial and error. And PRTG, Sanil, that you've mentioned there, there's somebody else, which I've seen on Reddit, has written a Teams module which has PRTG samples in there. And it's exactly the same concept as me. They've written a PowerShell module to send information via webhook, but they've actually got the PRTG webhook stuff in there. So it's something I need to publish officially to the PowerShell gallery. It's only on my GitHub at the moment, but I've got it in the works to pipeline that, and I'm probably just going to broadcast it on Twitch because I need an excuse to do some more PowerShell Twitch related gubbins. So it's yeah, I think that's most of the questions in the chat there. I'm not sure if there's any others. Sanil, if you wanted to confirm what you meant by instant status. And Josh has just linked to the blog post there in chat as well. So it's quite a lengthy post. I go over my VS Code setup, extensions, PowerShell snippets that I've got set up in there and things like that. So it's quite informative if you're looking for some quick shortcuts to make things. All right. Teams had a delay on status updates by default, it appears. All right, okay. Yeah, I've actually set Teams now. If you go into the settings in Teams, there's a way to, move fully over and register Teams so that things like SharePoint use Teams as your primary application. So we use Skype for Business still internally. It's not totally retired. But it's in the settings. I can't remember where it is. Settings. Register Teams as the chat app for Office. And it means that your status of online, offline gets reflected in Outlook and things like that. So I don't open Skype for Business now, and Skype for Business messages come through to Teams. There's admin requirements where you have to set it up in island mode initially, I think. But then you give the users the option of whether to use Skype or Teams. But I refuse to open Skype for Business, and I'm trying to force all of our devs who used to try and contact me through Skype to use Teams channels that we have set up specifically for the different products.
Nice.
So
it's slightly off topic.
Yeah.
But how are you finding PowerShell 7 in general?
I'm using it as my daily driver. I'm not using anything else. I sometimes default back to 5.1 if we've got any classic commandlets that I need.
Sure.
But I'm using the latest preview 2. And with 1807 and the RSAT tools built in as an additional feature, I can use select. What? Oh, I'm on guest Wi-Fi. I'm on guest Wi-Fi, which doesn't have AD connectivity. But
at least it gave you the right error message.
Yeah. So PowerShell 7 supports with the V1 of the active So you can use Active Directory as long as it's the installed version from 1809, I think it is, and onwards.
The one that ships on disk rather than
the on demand. There's a preview version of the Azure Active Directory module, which works with PowerShell 7, but it's not officially released yet.
Right.
But that should be going GA pretty soon as well.
And I think you can grab it out of the Cloud Shell if you needed to.
Yeah, they've actually published it to the test PowerShell gallery, which is where I got it from, but it hasn't received any updates in a while. So I'm using PowerShell 7 for Active Directory, Azure Active Directory, the AZ commandlets, and most of the stuff I'm writing now is cross-platform first, rather than writing it in Windows PowerShell and then thinking about how to convert it. I'm writing it in PowerShell 7 first and making sure that it's compatible with 5, because we've got 50-50 AWS Azure and 50-50 Mac users to Windows users. So
Right.
it's pretty fundamental to make that shift over, I think, when you're working in a cross-functional team like that. Because we've got we're using Azure DevOps to even publish stuff to AWS, and any modules we write are hosted on an internal feed. So for our Mac users to be able to consume those, they need to be compatible with PowerShell Core or above.
Nice.
And yeah, so just some contact info. That's my Twitter. If anyone wants to get in touch on Twitter or GitHub, you'll find the MS Teams module on there if you want to have a play with it. I'm like I say, I'm planning on getting on Twitch and streaming me getting a pipeline set up for that to get it into the PowerShell gallery. And if you're not in the PowerShell Slack, get in there, because it's an absolute wealth of information. There's just so many clever people in there willing to share information if you're stuck on a script at any time of day. And then there's also there's a UK Slack as well, which is a bit less popular because everyone just hangs out in the main one, and then my blog as well, if anyone fancies giving that a read. Any other questions? Anything appeared in Teams again? No?
Awesome. Well, thanks for that, Brett.
It's quite right. It's 4 minutes to lunchtime for me, so
Yeah, I think I was one of the initial batch of people bugging for a Teams backend ages ago, and then when it finally came out, I wasn't in a position to use it anymore.
Yeah, the other demo, which is quite good as well, which doesn't demonstrate Poshbot but demonstrates bots within Teams, is Steve Lee gave a presentation on the bot, PoshChan bot, that he's got set up in GitHub. And he goes at the start of that demo from PSConfig, he goes over setting up an outgoing webhook to an Azure function, which basically invokes any PowerShell you'll give it.
Yeah.
Which goes over the basic setup on how to set up a bot within Teams using an Azure function and a message queue. And he's basically written an equivalent to Poshbot, but all in Azure functions. Nice. So that's worth a look as well if you're not want to go all in on Poshbot, but you've got Azure functions or AWS Lambda available to you. You could set that up.
Awesome. Anyone else got questions? Feel free to unmute or chat or anything.
No, great presentation, good content.
Thank you. It's just a shame my bot didn't like installing modules for some reason. I'm not sure if that's my laptop, PowerShell 7, or the corporate network. So
I think the content was pretty self-explanatory in what happened, and I think it's pretty good.
Yeah. And it's pretty extensible. It's effectively PowerShell modules. So anything you can do with a PowerShell module, you can do with Poshbot. You just need to make sure that it knows about the commands, and you set up the access to it with the metadata within the functions and modules. So it's a little bit more work than writing a module, but once you get used to it, you could effectively. Chris Dent, who hangs around in the PowerShell Slack, he's got something called a stub command module. So you could have, and what it does is, if you've heard of proxy commands, where you can use his module to basically rewrite all of the Active Directory modules with parameters and functionality, and then just add the metadata. So you could rewrite the Active Directory module as a Poshbot module if you really wanted to. But that's stub command module. If you want to proxy any modules or functions, it's really handy as well. Like, yeah, I think I ran it through Exchange once against all the Exchange commandlets, and it scaffolds out and replicates all of the functions that are there. So you can rewrite your own. If you wanted to add an extra parameter to it, you can use the stub command and build your own that way. So it's really extensible, and Brandon's always up for any ideas, or there's a chat ops section within the PowerShell Slack, within the main PowerShell Slack. So he's always hanging around in there if you've got questions about Poshbot specifically or anything around that.
I think he's working on has been working on a book as well.
Yeah, has he already got a Poshbot book out? Or a chat ops book
There's
out?
something on LeanPub. I don't know. I haven't read it,
He's
but
been chipping away at it.
Yeah, I think I seen something on Twitter about somebody had bought a book about chat ops, but I don't know if it's specifically a Poshbot one or a chat ops.
I think it's a ChatOps book that he published himself, on LeanPub. But I think it's like an intro, getting started, something like that.
Yeah,
ChatOps the easy way. Yeah, he's a third done.
Yeah, I can't imagine the work that has to go into writing a book. Like,
Yeah,
I find it difficult enough writing slides for a presentation. On a book.
It's one of those things where it's sort of semi on my bucket list, but I don't know if I want to commit yet.
It was when they were looking for CFPs for the PS Conf book. I thought about it, and I have a tendency to overcommit to things. With having 5 kids, a wife, 2 dogs, a full-time job, and very little time as it is, I'm not sure I need to commit to writing a book which has an actual deadline.
Yeah, and that's where I landed last year as well. I had very much overcommitted, and unfortunately, my chapter in that book was the thing that had to give.
Yeah, I think the idea of that is good proofreaders, and I think that's something I would probably have to rely on heavily.
Yes.
So yeah, if there's no more questions, I think I'm going to go and grab some lunch. But if anyone has any questions, feel free to reach out, Twitter or in the PowerShell Slack /Discord /IRC /whatever else it's bridged with these days.
Awesome.
And I'll try and get that Teams module of mine published to the gallery so it's easier to install.
Wicked. Well, thanks again, Brett. That was awesome.
Cool. No worries at all. It's been a pleasure not being up until 1 o'clock in the morning having to present on something.
Yeah.
Cool, guys. Well, I'm hungry. I'll catch up with you soon, and like I say, just give me a shout if anyone wants to fire any questions my way.
Awesome. Have a good one.
You too, man.
Cheers. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, Drew.
And thanks everyone